Greetings. In this video, I'm going to discuss the importance of critical thinking. Now, when I say critical thinking, what I mean by that is the ability to evaluate why you do something the way you do it. So, for example, I was attending a master class at a conference, and I remember a student asking, "How do you play loudly on the guitar?" And a very, very skilled guitarist took a moment to reflect on it and said, well, to play louder, I have to press harder with my left hand. Which is true, that if you play louder and you're fretting, then you do have to press a little bit harder in order to not buzz. But that's actually a product of playing louder. It's not what causes you to play louder. A more analytical response would be, if you actually depress the string further with your right hand, it creates a larger sound when you release that string. So for example, I'm going to grab my guitar. Hopefully it's in tune, but we'll see. I'm going to just lightly press into this third string and then pull through. Now I'm going to see how I'm moving it all the way to the next string, and I get a louder sound. So now I'm going to not even depress it hardly at all. So not too loud. Depress it very far. Get a much bigger sound. Now watch this. I have three different strings that I'm touching right now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm barely touching them, and I pull through. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply pressure to my ring finger. So you can see how that E string is being displaced very far. The other two barely displaced. So here's my E. I displace it far, and it pops out over the other notes. I'm going to do the same thing with B. So B is very depressed, the other two lightly so. And you hear how B just pops right out dynamically. Now the third string, same effect. That is a very useful skill to practice. I would encourage you to get that to the point where when you're playing a piece of music, you can get the voice that you want to stand out to pop out over the other notes. Because usually what happens is if they're all the same volume, let's say we've got four voices and they're all the same volume, you're going to hear the highest voice. But if you have four voices but you're pressing really hard into the second to bottom voice, that one's going to be the one that's going to project the best. So, and you have to do it significantly if you're going to keep a melody going in the middle of a piece of music, which comes up quite frequently. So practice that and hone that skill. But for the sake of this situation, we're talking about critical thinking. What I would encourage you to do is be very careful about that, because even very skilled, sharp guitarists aren't really that careful about thinking, why do I do what I do, or how do I get the effects that I get? We can be trained to do something a certain way, but unless we actually experiment and figure out, well, what actually works best for this? Tremolo is a great example of. There are many, many, many teachings on how to play tremolo. There are many opinions that people throw out there. But until you start to experiment and try, what if I turn my hand a little bit this way? Well, what about this way? Well, what if I dig into the strings more? What if I play very loud? What if I practice loud? What if I practice softly? What if I practice at this speed and this speed and this speed? And there's all sorts of different methods that I've tested myself. I've put many hours into tremolo and discovered for myself what works and what doesn't. And I would encourage you, there is a tremendous of value in thinking for yourself rather than just being fed the answers. And the fact of the matter is that classical guitar is insanely complex. It gets really, really, really messy. And you have to have problem-solving skills in order to conquer the issues that continuously come up. And when you're first starting guitar, think of it like parenting. When a parent has a child and that child is an infant, that infant needs to be watched all day, every day. But as they get older, they grow in their independence. And now, eventually, that child is, an adult who's going off to college, and they're going and making their own choices, hopefully. And hopefully good choices, but you know how it goes. But the teacher-student relationship should be similar. That at first, when you know nothing about guitar, you're going to get a lot of just very clear guidance on this is exactly what you do. And hopefully that teacher is going to include, here's the why that we do that. But as you progress as a musician, you need to start having that independence that I'm ultimately I make the decision on what fingering I do for this piece of music or how I interpret this passage. And your teacher will become more and more of an advisor and a guide and um, less of someone who kind of controls or dictates what you do. In my opinion, a teacher should always give you explanations of why we do what we do, and hopefully they understand for themselves those very issues. But you need to be able a good teacher actually should cultivate that skill of teaching you how to solve problems. At first they would guide you through. One thing that I teach is, all right, how do we solve this problem? Well, we break it down into little pieces. And so, the first 6 months or a year I'm working with a student, I guide them through that process over and over and over and over and over. Then, after, you kind of gauge when they're ready, all right, so how do we break down this problem? And if you've done it enough times, they sort of just know and they start to do it themselves. And then what's really encouraging is when you see them come from their own practice and they tell you that they did this thing, or you can see that they did. So it's really something that can be learned. But critical thinking is incredibly valuable. A lot of people, you'd be surprised just how many people don't really stop and evaluate, why do I do what I do? But it's very, very important. So I encourage you to reflect on that and take the things that you do, everything, how much time you practice, how you interpret pieces of music, and what your technique is like, the angle you hold your hand. The more that you start to recognize all your assumptions and the things that you haven't questioned, the more you're going to be able to actually find solutions to problems that you didn't know you have. And let me give you an example of that. When I'm playing on multiple strings, let's say I'm playing arpeggios. Well, if I have my hand's kind of coming in this way along with the strings. So this naturally aligns my fingers in such a way that they each line up to a string. Now, let's say I tilt my hand down like this. Now my fingers align to one string very easily, which is good for tremolo or just a rapid scale passage or something like that. Now, it's not that one way is right and one way is wrong. It's that this is useful for one setting and this is useful for another setting. And if we understand that and recognize that, then when I'm trying to play a fast scale passage, I can evaluate, oh, what's my right hand positioning doing? Well, if I have always been taught to hold my hand one way when I play guitar, then when I try to do rapid scale passages, I'm going to bump other strings. But until I recognize that there's more than one way to hold my hand and there's different advantages to different right hand positions, that's going to open that door to understanding and tackling new fingerings. So I would encourage you to question everything. And I know some teachers absolutely hate that, but you need a teacher who's going to be humble enough to start to question their own, assumptions. There's been times where students ask me why I do something, and I explain it, and then I put it into practice, and I realize I'm wrong. And I can either acknowledge that to my student who just witnessed me screw up, or I can throw up a pride wall and just, this is how you're going to do it, and that just puts up walls and prevents us from growing and ultimately alienates me from my student. So question everything. I would love to get feedback. If you are experimenting with your technique and you start to question things you haven't questioned before and you make some discoveries, please share them with me. I would love to have you share a video or send me a comment or a private message. My email is in the description below. But I really love feedback, and I would be really encouraged to hear if this has been helpful to you. Thank you very much for watching, and God bless.